Imagine that your child is facing inequalities in their own schools and in their classrooms. They are seen as an afterthought and are oftentimes treated significantly different than their peers. Teachers are forcing their racial biases on the student, and as a result, they aren't able to achieve as much academically. This is the reality for many students of color. The most important times in their life for growth is being halted. Instances of racial biases are very common in schools and classrooms today, which is why teachers should take a color-conscious approach to teaching, meaning that they have not considered the meaning of racial or ethnic identity to the student, almost as if they are colorblind. Teachers also need to acknowledge the persistent gaps between white people and people of color and to understand the causes of those problems as well. I first became aware of this issue in my first semester class at CCSF in English 1A. In this class, I was able to learn a lot about this topic and is why I wanted to share it with you guys in my persuasive speech. Hopefully by the end of it, you guys will learn a lot and will be as moved as I was. And for the next few minutes, I will first be talking about the problems that students of color face in classrooms and in schools. 2, I will be going over the causes of these problems. And 3rd, I will be going over the solutions. But first, let's go over the problems. And number 1, inequality in education continues to affect the lives of millions of students of color. And many students of color face achievement gaps in their classes. In the book Colorblind by Tim Wise, he explains that educational inequality continues to plague the lives of millions of students of color. The working class and low-income class students of all colors face inadequate educational resources due to economic status alone. Explicitly, racial forms of marginalization are very much in play for non-whites, above and beyond class standing. Vidya Shah gives an example in the 2019 article for theconversation.com, saying Black, racialized, and lower-income students face significant gaps in student outcomes. Other reports show gaps as high as 30% in standardized test scores. Lower socioeconomic groups of Black, Middle Eastern, Indigenous, and Latino boys were among the most impacted by the achievement gaps. And because students of color are being discriminated against in their classes, this can lead to them feeling different or alienated compared to their peers. And students of color are showing that they feel disconnected from their schools. The feeling that institutionalized racism is creating emotional distance between them and their white peers and faculty. In the 2016 article for The Atlantic, Adrian Green explains that various studies suggest that perceived or actual discrimination can make it hard for students of color to engage with their campus in the way that their white peers do. In the same 2019 article for The Conversation, Vidya Shah says racialized students feel less comfortable at school. Black, Latino, and racially mixed students from lower socioeconomic groups reported lower levels of school satisfaction than all other racial groups. These students felt less comfortable participating in class than students in higher socioeconomic groups. Number 3, students of color are impacted negatively because they feel different from their peers, and oftentimes they push themselves too hard, resulting in damage. Because these students face discrimination in their classrooms, this can lead to them stressing, and because of the stress, these can form into mental illness such as depression and anxiety. And in the 2000 article for The Atlantic, Adrian Green explains that for minority students, surviving and thriving academically despite multiple encounters with racism or stereotyping may require a different type of resolve than do typical college student struggles like balancing work and school or overcoming a difficult homework assignment. And Webb Du Bois coined the concept of double consciousness, whereby a Black person are essentially forced to have 2 identities, to view themselves as they're perceived by their non-Black peers. That psychology can create a unique circumstance for Black students today, and a psychology some researchers argue may even lead to mental health problems that go unnoticed. But how are these problems caused in the first place? I will now be discussing that. Number 1, the main cause. Discrimination of students of color starts from their economic background, specifically where they live. A student of color's neighborhood greatly influences their education. For many students of color, they come from low-income neighborhoods where resources aren't as easily accessible. They're unable to receive an education at another school, and as a result, they go to a school in their nearby neighborhoods. In these neighborhoods, the schools are made up of mainly minorities, where they aren't able to receive a full and good education. In this chart from the Seattle Times, it shows the funding inequalities that schools in Washington face from 2014 to 2015. It clearly shows that schools in lower income areas aren't given as much money for academics. And in the book Colorblind, he explains how oftentimes in lower income neighborhoods, teachers are placed that don't have as much experience. And as a result, the students aren't receiving an education from a fully qualified teacher. Number 2, students of color face racial biases in their classrooms, which affects which classes they are put in and how good of an education they will receive. And an example that I really liked by Megan Lays in her 2018 article for Not That Kind of Racism, she gives a scenario. And in it, Ryan attends a top-ranked school where most of the students come from high-income families, but Jamal, on the other hand, attends his chronically underfunded, poor-performing neighborhood school, which has fewer resources, less experienced teachers, and higher dropout rates. Jamal's favorite subjects are science and math, but unlike Ryan's more affluent high school, Jamal will not have access to the full range of math, science, and college preparatory classes. Despite his strong interest in academics and his high achievement on standardized tests, Jamal's teacher does not refer him to be screened for the gifted and talented program. Instead, he is more likely to be subjected to harsh disciplinary policies, including excessive suspensions, expulsions, and arrests that would make him miss valuable school time. But why are students of color being placed in lower track and remedial level classes in the first place? So Tim Wise explains this in Colorblind. He says that at wider schools, teachers are more apt to see dysfunction in Black and brown students, not because they necessarily demonstrate more of it, but because of the teacher's own inabilities to relate to the students of color, or because of various subconscious biases. But now that I have discussed the problems and causes of these problems, I will now discuss some solutions that will hopefully bring positive change to these. Number 1, teachers can take a course designed with the objective on how to be more color conscious in the classroom. So teachers can benefit greatly by this, and Joan L. Whip explains in her 2015 article how these educational programs prepare teachers to teach in culturally responsive ways and also act as critical change agents in school and in society as well. And Kara Uluki explains in her 2016 journal that schools of education can take steps to ensure positive placements that break down stereotypes by working with competent teachers who expect the best from their students. Many teachers struggle with preparing to teach in diverse populations, but by having teachers go through these classes and in these trainings on how to be more color conscious, they can better benefit their students. In these classes, teachers can learn how to respect, acknowledge, and to understand their students of color, and as a result, their students can come out more successful. Number 2, teachers can be more color conscious in their classrooms by having their students of color positively reflect on their identities. And Colorblind, Tim Wise expands more on this idea, saying, provide centering exercises in class that allow students of color to reflect favorably on their identities. And by doing these exercises, this can reduce racial performance gap by 40%. In David J. John's presentation, Institutional Racism, Biases, and Solution, he explains that teachers can help students develop positive feelings about their ethnic and racial identity by exposing them to diverse role models and creating a safe space for them to celebrate their differences. By having students reflect on their identities, they're able to view themselves as strong rather than view the stereotypes. It can also decrease students' feelings of separation and exclusion. I hope this speech was able to inform you of the inequalities that students of color face and why it is so important that teachers take a color-conscious approach to teaching. Students of color many times are facing inequalities in their classrooms and schools. Rather than gaining necessary academic life and life skills, they are being treated very differently and are oftentimes not paid attention to. Color-conscious teaching should be used by every teacher to ensure that their students are leaving their classrooms successful. Thank you for your time.